Much have I travelled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told that deep-browed Homer ruled as his domain. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold.
I love that poem by John Keats. I think it speaks to the value of libraries and how wonderful it is that all of us have the privilege of going to our library and then going anywhere in the world we want to go, in any time period that we want to be, and meet people we certainly couldn't have met any other way. That's the value of libraries. And that's the reason I'm so pleased to be here with you again, to work with a great staff at Concordia Parish Public Library and Director Amanda Taylor in presenting these programs to you each month. I also thank Delta Bank, because Delta Bank is one of our sponsors for this and makes all these programs possible.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our program this month. The program's title is Naomi Judd's Journey. Not even stars are spared. Naomi Judd's life story is a very difficult life story. Her journey was not easy. She had some false starts, she had some money issues, she had problems with her family, she had a little bit of everything going wrong, but she still managed to persevere. This picture of her, she's performing in California in 2008, and she has that bright, happy smile on her face. But not every smile you see is real. Those of you who have dealt with depression yourselves or have known someone with depression know that very often there's a big smile on the face, but underneath there's a great deal of pain and discomfort. Fair warning about this program. It's going to contain some difficult subjects for a lot of people. We're going to talk about things like mental illness, like child abuse, like suicide, and like addiction. So be warned, it's not all light and happy. But I also want you to know that this is a program that tells the story of an heroic struggle against enormous personal challenge, of overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and finally, for valiantly dealing with adversity for decades. It's a very public story. It's a public story about the Judd girls. The two best known would be Winona and her mother, Naomi. They're best known because they were the singing duo that broke all kinds of records when they were singing together. The third one is the other daughter, Ashley. She's a renowned actress. She's had a very fine career herself, but it hasn't been as public as the two Judds were. So it's a public story, though, about those three women, but it's also a very private story about those same three women, because we're going to talk about their lives through the words of Naomi Judd, the mother of the two. I selected this program to do not very long after news broke that Naomi Judd had died. She had committed suicide. The music world was staggered. General pop culture was amazed. You just don't hear of those kinds of things that often. And she had always been associated with happiness and fun and happy-go-lucky kind of person. I'd heard of the Judds, Winona and her mother, Naomi, but I'd never heard them sing. I just knew that they were important to country music. I knew that Winona sang lead and that Naomi sang the harmony. I got curious, so as usual, I did research. There are lots of books that are written either by the Judds or about the Judds, but I settled on two to review for this program, these two. And the reason I chose them is that they're both autobiographies. They're both written by Naomi herself. They both, to a lesser degree, to a full degree, deal with Naomi's struggle with mental illness. And I started thinking, who better to explain her story or tell about her life than Naomi herself? The first book, Love Can Build a Bridge, was published by Naomi in November of 1993. It's a very fun book. It's a happy book. It tells of their career. More about that in a minute. The second book, River of Time, My Descent into Depression and How I Emerged with Hope, was published in December of 2016. So there's a 23-year difference between when she tells her life story here and when she comes back 23 years later and she tells the real life story here. Love Can Build a Bridge. If you're going to read just one of them, read this one. This is the one that has a whole combination of wonderful things that different people with different interests will enjoy. It's got lots of humor. Let me pause right here and say Naomi Judd is a writer. These are not ghost-written. These are her words, and you can tell. She also wrote songs, some very famous songs. She is a writer. She's a talented writer, and because of that, the books are very readable. Again, this one's filled with humor. It's got lots of happiness in it. Toward the end, it becomes less upbeat and less hopeful. It talks first, through Naomi's words, it talks about her childhood, which was traumatic and difficult. Then it talks about her very challenging young adulthood. Then, as a divorced mother of two little girls, how she struggled with nothing to try to get an education so she could make a life for her children. And then how, basically on a dare, she and Winona decide to sing in public, just to see how it'll go, and people absolutely love them. So, for those of you who are interested in how people who are ordinary people become superstars in the music industry, this is the book for you, because she very carefully chronicles every step of the way. All the steps forward, the 2 steps back, and then another step forward. You get the whole story. And of course, ultimately, the 2 of them reach the stars. It also explains her struggle, again in this book, with hepatitis C. It was a near-fatal illness, and it effectively ended the Judds. They did perform a few more times after, but the touring on the roads, the having wonderful gigs all over the country, she could no longer do it. She had to see if she could survive. I'd like to read you something from the prologue in Love Can Build a Bridge. In her words, I think you'll enjoy hearing what she has to say about this book. In the prologue, she writes the following: "We began our lifelong search for harmony with slow and halting steps, a teenage mother and an unplanned child on a journey that would lead to magic and milestones that neither of us could even imagine. Winona and I were instantly one, a partnership, a team, just the 2 of us against a frightening and unknown world. On that spring day in 1964, we began our wonderful duet, a blend of heart, mind, and soul that continues to this day. This is our story." What's interesting about that to me is that there's no mention of Ashley. It's Ashley's story too. And we're going to think about that as we move through these books, because That's the seed of what becomes a problem within the family, the core of the three Judd women. The other book, River of Time, My Descent into Depression and How I Emerged with Hope, it's written by the same person. It's written 23 years after the original autobiography, and it covers many of the same stories that she covers in her first book. But this time, it's filled with truth. The truth that Naomi now knows to be, because she's had years of counseling, medications, therapy, shock treatments, and psychiatric care. So it's fascinating. If you're interested in watching the evolution of mental illness, then you need to read River. It begins when she's 3 years old and she's traumatized. The stories that she tells, this time she fills in blanks that you don't have in Bridge. And most of the retelling of the stories is frankly very sad and very troubling. I think they should both be read, and they should be read in this order. Love first, then this one, because this one gives you a full picture of their career. This one gives you a almost microscopic look at the mental illness and what caused the problems. Now, she wrote some other things. I have here some books, a collection of the books that she wrote. She started, her first book ever to write was Love Can Build a Bridge, and that was in 1993. And if you look at the bottom of the list, in 2016 comes River of Time. That's the last book that she wrote. And in between, she writes all these other books. 97, Naomi's Home Companion. 2000, Naomi Judd's Guardian Angels. 2004, Naomi's Breakthrough Guide, 20 Choices to Transform Your Life. 2005, The Transparent Life, 30 Proven Ways to Live Your Best. And then a great little children's book, Gertie and the Goldfish and the Christmas Surprise. That was in 2005. 2007, Guide to Aging Gracefully. Then 2007, also she comes back to Gertie the Goldfish. This time it's Gertie the Goldfish and the Golden Rule. And then in 2016, River of Time. Notice her two autobiographies are her first book that she writes and the last book that she writes. And in between, with the exception of the two children's books, these are all self-help books to help women cope with life and aging. She wrote 9 books altogether. She wrote over 60 songs. She had 9 of her songs nominated for Grammy Awards. Whitney Houston's beautiful I Will Always Love You, that really made Whitney Houston's career, Naomi Judd wrote that one. Burt Bacharach's What the World Needs Now is Love, Sweet Love. She wrote that one for him. And she also wrote I Run to You, Martina McBride's great hit. She's remembered, Naomi Judd, as one of the true rock stars of country music. Naomi Judd wrote countless songs and a number of books, and all of them speak to life as she had lived it. And so that makes them, I think, especially charming. Her life was not easy, though, as I told you before. In fact, it was incredibly hard in many ways. To do the research for this, not only did I read the 2 books, and I'll confess twice, to be sure I had it all in my mind, I also did a lot of reading of articles. They, of course, had thousands of news write-ups about their career and the things that they were doing. So what I've done for this program is I've compiled that. I've used the 2 novels, or the 2 autobiographies, as the baseline. And then I've gone out from there to fill in some of the gaps that I was curious about, and I thought that you all were too. This is a picture of Naomi with her younger brother, Brian, who was her heart. Naomi was born Diana Ellen Judd. She was born in 1946 in Ashland, Kentucky. Her father was Charles Glenn Judd, and he owned a gas station, and he worked there, she said, 12 hours a day. Her mother was Pauline, Ruth, Polly, and also Paulie Oliver. She was a housewife until her husband divorced her. And then she married a riverboat captain and became a riverboat cook. Diana, our Naomi, had two brothers, Brian, who died of leukemia in 1965 when he was just 17, and Michael, who grew up, became a preacher, and remained very close to his sister until her death. In fact, he conducted her funeral service. Brian's death was a crushing blow to the whole Judd family. They didn't know how to deal with it. Naomi will later recall in both of her books that really her parents never talked about Brian's illness. He was away, he was in a hospital somewhere, and then periodically he would come home and he would be deathly sick and they would take care of him, and then he would have to go back to the hospital. One of the last nights that he was alive, Naomi spent the night in his hospital room with him, just the two of them. And she writes that it was a wonderful time when they shared memories of their childhood and all the pranks that they played and all the things that they used to do. But he asked her that night to tell him what was wrong with him and to tell him, was he going to die? She didn't know the answer to either one. Her parents had never told her what he had, and they never suggested that he would die. So it was a very difficult moment for her, and she never forgot it. It was one of the things that she harbored that decades later would surface through her mental illness. This is a great picture of Diana as the young mother with her young girl, who's right now known as Christina, but she will become Winona. And she's playing a guitar that her mother has gotten her for Christmas. And so it's a happy kind of a thing. Diana's story, as I've said, the childhood was traumatic. When she was 17, and she was a senior in high school, she was doing very well. She took piano lessons. Her teacher said she could become a classical pianist if she wanted. She had a brief fling with a boyfriend, Charles Jordan. 3 months later, she realized she was pregnant. She called him, told him. He left town the next day, and she never heard from him again. Her mother, when she finally told her parents that she was pregnant, and this was a couple of months later, her mother literally threw her out of the house. She said that she would not have another crying baby in her home. So, 2 weeks before her scheduled high school graduation, Diana gave birth to Christina. Diana and Michael Simonella had been dating for several years. He was a little older, and he was in love with her. He asked her to marry him on their first date and every date after for years. And then finally this time, he asked her to marry, and she agreed. And so they were married. This is a picture of the father, Michael, and his daughter, Diana. This is taken in 1968. The two of them had a second child, a daughter they named Ashley, but the marriage was destined for failure. Even moving to California to find better work didn't pull them together. Michael worked as a marketing analyst for the horse racing industry. Diana and Michael divorced in 1972, and Diana found herself with 2 children, 2 daughters that she had to rear on her own. They survived on welfare. There was no other way to do it. And Diana took nursing classes at night when she could because she wanted to be a nurse. That had always been one of her dreams. And she thought maybe if she got a nursing degree, she would be able to take better care of her children. After the divorce was final, Diana made her move. She changed her name. She went back to Judd, her maiden name. But she also got rid of Diana. She named herself Naomi, after the biblical character. She too felt that she was in search. And so she, from that point forward, legally and in every other way, she was Naomi Judd. This is of a picture of her as she's doing her nursing practicum. She was divorced and nearly destitute, and so she moves back with her little girls to Kentucky, and she settles in a tiny little mountain town called Morill, and it's close to Berea, Kentucky. They lived in a mountain shack, which was, in every sense of the word, a shack. It had none of the amenities at all, but it was a place that they could live. She enrolled in nursing school at Berea, and she was absolutely determined she was going to get her way out of this for her parents. Decades later, when Winona Judd was remembering her childhood, she said this: "If we didn't make it or grow it, we didn't have it." And their life was that limited. There was no extra money at all. It was a subsistence living. This is a picture from 1980. Winona and Naomi are practicing singing on the front porch. And this is really how it started. Naomi explains that she was growing distant from her daughter because her daughter was obviously, growing up and not being able to socialize with other children, didn't have the money that the other children had, couldn't do the things that other children had. So one of the things that she and her daughter Winona started doing was singing together. They listened to the radio and they discovered that they really could sing. It was in Morill that Winona actually learned to play the guitar seriously. She and her mother began harmonizing together. Her mother had a wonderful ear for harmony, and their voices blended in a beautiful, beautiful way. There was significant tension, though, between the two, and it was probably made worse, quite frankly. They grew up together. Naomi was a child when she had her daughter. And so she's experiencing growing up at the same time her child is growing. The end result was that Winona and Naomi grew up like sisters, and Ashley was their little sister. It's an interesting dynamic for the family. Winona Judd said this, again years later, describing her childhood. "In the beginning, I started playing guitar just out of the fact that we didn't have a telephone or television. We did have a radio. I remember listening to the Opry and NPR with my dad when I was small, but I just started playing out of boredom. At that age, it's such a social age for a young girl that all I had were my animals and my guitar. I think it's a natural progression for Mom to hear my voice and hum along. All of a sudden, before I know what's going on, she has attached herself vocally to me, and it's as if we're one voice." And that's the way it was. The two began singing first for little small groups, but their reputation grew. The more they sang in public, the more people began insisting that they needed to move to Nashville so that they could be discovered. Naomi had earned that nursing degree, so she began working in the Nashville area, sort of as a rotation nurse, I think is what they call them, where she would move from hospital to hospital as she was needed when it was her turn to work. And this was the way she put food on the table for the girls. Through the help of one of her patients, Naomi and Winona were given a live audition for RCA. Very, very unusual for that to happen, and it's covered beautifully in Love Can Build a Bridge about this just accident of luck and perhaps a little faith helped them. That audition went very well. At this point, Winona is 19 years old. They're offered a contract, and the rest is history. This is a picture of them performing in 1981. They're performing the song Mama, He's Crazy, which was their first breakout hit. Notice in the picture the difference in their costuming. Naomi was the one who was always in flashy dresses, very feminine attire. Winona preferred to wear slacks, pants. Winona was the straight man in their act, and Naomi was the one for comic relief. It worked well for them. In 1980, they officially formed the Judds. They had their contract with the RCA, and they were ready to roll. They became one of country music's most famous mother and daughter duos, and the most commercially successful duo in the history of country music. They had 20 top 10 hits, 15 of them going to #1. They went undefeated for 8 consecutive years at all 3 major country music award shows, winning the top prize. They won 5 Grammys, and Naomi won Country Song of the Year Grammy for her song, Love Can Build a Bridge, which was the basis then for her book. In 1984, the 3 are back together in some ways that they haven't been for a long time. This is a picture, it's a happy picture. All 3 of them look happy. The mama, Naomi, is in the rocking chair. Ashley's seated on the rocker's arm, and Winona is standing behind them. Ashley is something of an enigma. She's in this book, but she's not in this book at the level that Winona is. She's also in this book, and by halfway through, she's more important in this book than Winona is. It's an interesting movement in the life of these 3. While the mother and the sister, Naomi and Winona, were growing their career, Ashley was left alone most of the time. The result was that the 3 were never really close as a threesome as they might have been. Ashley attended 13 different schools before she graduated high school. It wasn't until Winona was 30 that she learned for the first time that Michael Cinnamella was not her natural father. She had been brought up to believe that he was. Interestingly, Ashley, her half-sister, had learned much earlier, but she chose not to tell Winona because she felt it wasn't her place to. Ashley and her father remained very close. This is a picture of the 2 women. This is 1984. It's going to be the cover of their album, Why Not Me? And you look at this picture and you realize why so many people who were their fans thought they were sisters. They had no idea that they were mother and daughter unless they were talked about. Between 1983 and 1991, the Judds released 6 studio albums for RCA. And during this same period, 83 to 91, they earned over $20 million in record sales. 1985, February, they take home their first Grammy. It's for Best Country Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocal, and it was for, of course, Mama, He's Crazy. 1989, Naomi weds again. This is a true love marriage. She doesn't have to get married. She marries for love, and she marries a fellow named Larry Strickland. You see him here. Quite a nice looking guy, quite a nice guy, apparently. She married him. He was a musician himself. He was a singer, and he also played a pretty good bass. He was part of the Stamps Quartet, and he sang and toured, sang backup and toured with Elvis Presley for years. Throughout the nearly 33 years that they were married, he managed Naomi's Hallmark Channel TV shows. The one that was most famous was Naomi's New Morning. He promoted her memoir, River of Time, and the other books. He supported her acting in Hallmark movies and was always with her when she performed on stage. And he also managed Wynonna's music career. Most important to me, though, was that he stayed by Naomi's side up until the point of her death. 1991 was the year of major change for the Judds. They couldn't be the Judds anymore. Naomi was diagnosed with hepatitis C, and the doctors told her she had at most 3 years to live. Her liver was that destroyed. At that time, there was no cure for it, and so she, of course, had to stop touring. She had to go home. As she describes it, she got on her couch and stayed there. Her career essentially was over as she turned her attention to living these last few years that she had. At the same time that Naomi is going home and leaving the bright lights, Wynonna is having to step out in front of those lights as a solo act. She did it with Naomi's encouragement and her blessing, but this was an extremely hard time for both of them. Naomi missed performing, and she couldn't do anything but stay home. Wynonna missed her mother's harmony, but she couldn't do anything but sing on. Her first solo album, entitled Wynonna, which you see here, sold over 5 million copies. It went platinum in 3 days. And her first 3 solo singles went to '1 on the charts, so she blasted off. While her career is blasting as a solo artist, in 1991, Naomi has to find something to do with her time while she's trying to heal, if possible. First thing she did was she created the Naomi Judd Education and Research Fund to raise awareness of hepatitis C. She became a spokesperson for the American Liver Foundation. You see her here delivering a talk. And she gave a lot of talks about her experience with the liver disease and her attempts to get well. She met with every specialist she could get to listen to her. And they talked with her, they looked at her blood work. Some nutritionists suggested some things that she should try in terms of her diet that would perhaps help her to heal. She did everything that they said for her to do. Ashley wanted to be an actress. She succeeded at that. She wanted more to be a humanitarian worker, and she succeeded at that too. And through her influence, both her mother and her sister became aware of humanitarian issues worldwide. Ashley can sing, and she can sing pretty well, but she never wanted to be on the same path that her sister and her mother were on. She forged her own path, and she was very successful with it. In 1992, Wynonna now is in her solo career, and Naomi is being an advocate for liver health and so forth. 1992, the three of them gather in California for the Commitment to Life concert. It's a benefit, and it's something that Ashley draws them to because of her concern for humanitarian issues. Ashley Judd actually had the most education of the 3 Judd girls. In 2007, she earned a Bachelor of Arts at the University of Kentucky. 2009, she earned an honorary DHL degree from Union College. In 2010, she earned the MBA from Harvard Kennedy School. And in 2016, she was accepted into the PhD program in public policy at Berkeley. But she had to take a medical leave because by 2016, she was also having problems. Hers were seen through migraines, terrible migraine headaches. 1998, Naomi was declared cured. It was an amazing moment. She's been out of the business essentially for 7 years. But because she has been allowed to be part of a special treatment, it's interferon alpha treatments for this hepatitis C, it works. The doctor said that she had achieved what they called a virologic cure, and she was free to go forward and live her life. Only 20% of the patients who use this particular treatment attain virus-free status. To do this, she had to inject herself 3 times a week. The interferon vials themselves had to be kept refrigerated under a very small temperature range. It had to be very cold, and it had to be that way the whole time, or it would basically spoil. If she wasn't at home where she had her interferon in her refrigerator correctly cooled, or on the tour bus with Winona, where she had a refrigerator she could keep it safe. Then she traveled with an igloo container with lots of ice in it. And then she, of course, had to carry hypodermic syringes in her purse. And she said it always made it very interesting when she was flying somewhere. In 1998, she gave an interview with the Chicago Tribune, and she said this: "I've not only overcome and survived, but I've thrived. When you are told by the medical authorities you have 3 years on the planet, that you're going to take a 6-foot dirt nap, and that this is an absolutely incurable terminal illness, the sense of entrapment is so suffocating, so claustrophobic." Between 91 and 98, discovery of the illness, discovery of the cure. Naomi was fighting the hepatitis. She was also fighting the beginnings of depression. She was miserable. She missed everything about her previous life. It was all gone. She couldn't perform. She really couldn't travel that much. She mostly missed her fans and the challenges of road life. In 1994, she and Winona reunited to sing during the Super Bowl halftime show of that year. It exhausted her, but she made it through, and she said later that her fans gave her the energy to perform. This was a very important performance for Winona, too, because the year before, she had had a son out of wedlock, reflecting her mother's history, and her fans had regarded in a very negative way. This is a picture from '94 at the Super Bowl where they are performing, and it was a wonderful performance by all accounts. In 1996, Winona married Nashville businessman Arch Kelly, and the next year they had their second child together, a daughter. But the marriage dissolved in 1999. In 2003, Winona married again. This time she married her bodyguard, D.R. Ranch. That marriage ended in 2007 when he was arrested on child sex assault and battery charges. In 2000, Naomi joined her daughter again to do a special performance at the San Jose Arena in San Jose, California. And Naomi is healthy now. You see, it's been 2 years since she's been declared cured. And so you see with her face and with Winona's face, they're happiest when they're performing together. They reunited in a New Year's Eve concert, and later they went on tour together. And that helped to revive and in many ways save Winona's solo career. In 2003, Winona appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show to talk about her problems with her weight. She said that her weight problems began when she was a child, when her parents divorced, and she called it a food addiction. It didn't help that Naomi was a size 6. Winona said on the Oprah Winfrey Show the following: "I had been so alone those years of my life. I would get so hungry, I would get panicky." So there's trauma from that childhood that follows. Also in 2000, and this was the thing that frankly totally surprised me, in 2000, Naomi files for divorce against Larry Strickland. She cited his adultery as her reason. The couple didn't separate. Naomi withdrew the suit, and very little can be found, I promise you, about this, because I looked. They continued their marriage until her death. This is taken in 2004. I thought it was a particularly pretty picture of them. They both are happy. It's 4 years after this filing, and obviously their problems are solved. The next year, the Judd girls met Desmond Tutu. They were at a youth AIDS gala. Again, this is part of Ashley's direction as she's moving them toward awareness and giving support to humanitarian issues. The year after that picture's taken, Ashley undergoes 6 weeks of treatment for depression, insomnia, and codependency. These are conditions that her mother is treated for as well. During the same time, Winona is taking periodic treatments and counseling. Even when the Judds were singing in their original configuration as the Judds during that period when they won all the awards, both of the girls and Naomi had to deal with some serious problems with depression and anger and anxiety. In 2010, Naomi and Winona are performing at the Country Music Awards Music Festival in Nashville, and they are happy. You notice that in this picture, Winona is considerably thinner than she has been. In 2010, Naomi had the pleasure of being at Maya Angelou's 82nd birthday party. It was held in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And here Naomi is comforting Maya Angelou. They became friends. Remember I told you at the beginning, Naomi Judd is a writer. She was a writer first, and that's why she was drawn to the poetess. In 2012, Winona marries again. This time, her third marriage is to Cactus Moser. He's the drummer for Highway 101. Attending the wedding were her 2 children and Cactus's 3 children. I didn't want it to be about anybody except Cactus and me, Winona said to the press at the time. Please notice she did not invite her sister or her mother to attend her wedding. And Naomi writes about this particular hurt in River of Time. Winona, explaining the absence of her mother and sister at her wedding, because of course the reporters immediately noticed that they weren't there. She said this to US Weekly: "If I know Ashley, she would have repositioned my dress, or Mom would have given me a Kleenex to stuff in my bra, or told me that I have something in my teeth. I just didn't want that. I just wanted to get married." 2 months after their wedding, tragedy struck. The 2 of them, Winona and Cactus, were riding their motorcycles. Cactus was in a terrible wreck, and his leg had to be amputated above the knee. They remained married, and they did well. The year before Winona's marriage, Ashley Judd released a memoir. It's entitled All That Is Bitter and Sweet, in which she explains how she often felt isolated after being left alone for long periods of time while her mother and her sister were working. This is a review of her book. It was in the Goodreads.com online review in 2011, and it reads thus. In this memoir, Ashley noted that the coping strategies she had developed to deal with her own emotional pain, stemming from childhood abandonment, were no longer working. Seeking inpatient treatment in 2006 for the grief that had nearly killed her, Ashley found not only her own recovery and an enriched faith, but an expanded kit of spiritual tools that energized and advanced her feminist social justice work. Now, in this deeply moving and unforgettable memoir, Ashley Judd describes her odyssey as a left-behind, lost child attains international prominence as a fiercely dedicated advocate. Her story ranges from anger to forgiveness, isolation to interdependence, depression to activism. In telling it, she resoundingly answers the inevitable question about the relationship between healing oneself and serving others. Interestingly, that same year, Naomi's depression and anxiety battles begin in earnest. She and Winona are on what they call their encore tour. It's when she's well enough now, healthy enough, she feels like she can tour, and the doctors say that she can. And she feels like it's the only way, Naomi does, it's the only way that she can get past her depression, which is growing. They made a mistake, and Naomi admits it in her book, River. They agreed to do a reality show for Oprah's network. And she describes how intrusive it was to have cameras with them every minute of the day, everywhere they were. And she said that she and Winona were fighting, arguing, challenging each other. It was a difficult time, and all of that got filmed too, and of course found its way into this show. Naomi's depression and the panic attacks that were now coming would find her staying in several psychiatric wards, enduring a heavy regimen of a variety of medications as doctors tried in good faith to find something that would work, and nothing did. She even underwent electric shock therapy. None of it helped. In 2013, she's pictured here, and see the smile. It's a smile, and she's dying inside. She's being inducted into the Kentucky Legends Hall of Fame in Louisville, Kentucky. She was inducted into the Walk of Legends during Louisville's International Film Festival. She's shown here with actor Conrad Bachman. Her handprints sort of cemented her legacy as her words of wisdom forever lived on through her music and through her books. 2015, Winona's daughter, Grace, is arrested for promoting meth manufacturing. In 2016, she pleads guilty, but she's able to reduce her felony charge to a misdemeanor charge of meth possession only. Later that year, she was declared a fugitive from justice and had her probation revoked. 2017, she's sentenced to 8 years for violating her probation period. She pled guilty for possession, manufacturing, and distribution of meth. 2019, she was released early from the West Tennessee State Penitentiary. 2015 to 2019, you have to know that her grandmother, Naomi, was sad, worried, frightened over this. 2016, she publishes River of Time. She's been writing it during all this chaotic period in her family's life. She begins giving interviews to promote the book and to encourage others who are suffering from drug and treatment-resistant depression and from anxiety and panic attacks. She's now dealing with a new thing. It's a seething rage, total rage, that overcomes her periodically, kind of like a panic attack does, and it alters her personality. She begins cursing all the time, and she never did that before. In fact, she laughs in her book and says that before this, I was the one who would walk out of a movie if it had some bad language in it. She was angry because through therapy, through the shock treatments, through the medications, through counseling, she's bringing back memories from her childhood and adulthood that are making her realize why she is as depressed as she is. She suffered child abuse from her Uncle Charlie when she was just 3 years old. That, by the way, is the opening chapter of River. You've gone from happy and she's the hepatitis, but she's going to make it, to she's being molested as a 3-year-old. She remembers her mother's indifference and coldness towards her when she was growing up. And she has fury over the unresolved conflicts between herself and Winona that are becoming more and more obvious. In a 2016 interview with Robin Roberts with Good Morning America, Naomi said this, "I love her, Winona, but there are just times we need a break from each other. We're still a little estranged from each other." The truth was they weren't speaking. They weren't speaking at all. In fact, she writes in River of Time that the way they communicate is, for example, Winona has a small picture of her mother and herself when she's a child, just the two of them, and she leaves it in Naomi's mailbox for her to find whenever she gets her mail. She doesn't even bring it in. Naomi's mother, Polly Judd Rideout, is a figure that more and more comes into focus in River of Time. The more she struggled with her memories, the more Naomi had a clearer picture of her mother's behavior. In River of Time, she discloses that her mother turned her into Child Protective Services while she was living in California on welfare, trying to take classes. She reported her for not reporting all of the income she was making to the IRS. But the reason she really reported her was she was furious because she had been told that Naomi was smoking pot. With psychiatrists' help, Naomi eventually realized that her mother had always envied her and the amazing life that she had forged for herself and her 2 little girls. Naomi finally accepted the fact that her mother could never show any real affection toward her, even though she showed much love toward Naomi's 2 brothers. Again, I think it's best if we let Naomi tell her story about her mother. Let me read something to you from River of Time. In River of Time, she writes, "In my first book, Love Can Build a Bridge, I painted a picture of Mother as far from maternal than she ever was. I think I wrote that way to gain her approval and to give her some status in the community of Ashland. I wanted to protect and defend her because her life was never easy. My mother spent so many years feeling both anonymous and humiliated about her difficult life that it wasn't hard to understand how she became bitter. But even when things went her way, she was unable to be happy. She remained negative, judgmental, and harsh in her opinion of others." Not a very warm and fuzzy mother-daughter relationship. The year before Naomi's death, 2021, Ashley suffers a major injury. She literally shattered her leg. She's in the jungle doing humanitarian work. She's in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Porters had to carry her 55 hours to get her into South Africa, where she could get to a hospital and have the surgery necessary to make her whole again. Her recovery was very, very difficult. The next year, 2022, Naomi was having a very difficult time controlling the depression and the panic attacks. Those attacks were now happening almost daily. She wasn't sleeping well at night, and it made her feel like her life wasn't worth living and that she wasn't worth living. She lost all sense of self-worth. The medications that she was taking made her look heavy. They made her swell, and that was bad for a woman who had always been very proud of the way she looked. And of course, they made her unhealthy. They made the mental illness in many ways worse. Part of the problem was she was addicted. And so when her husband was prescribed during this time a particular pill to help him be calm, she stole some of his pills and got herself back on them too, which only made the rest of the prescriptions she was taking worse. Both daughters and Larry hoped that the upcoming induction that the Judds were going to have into the Country Music Hall of Fame on May the 1st would help Naomi to do and feel better. On April the 11th of 2022, Naomi and Winona appeared in the CMT Music Awards program. There's a picture of them, and you can see, obviously, Naomi has gained some weight. She still looks happy. She still has that smile. She has an enormous wig on because by this time, she has almost no hair of her own because of the medications that she's had to take. On April 30th, 2022, after a particularly difficult period for Naomi during which Larry and Ashley stayed with her and therapists continued working with her, on the morning of April 30th, she was having an especially hard time. She was panicked and she was crying. Eventually, she calmed down, went up to her bedroom to rest, while Ashley went outside for a few moments. Now, what I'm going to tell you is what has been reported in the press, and also parts of this have been reported by her children, by her daughters, and by her husband. When Ashley came back in the house, she went upstairs and found her mother mortally wounded from a gunshot to the head. Naomi died shortly after being taken by ambulance to a hospital in South Nashville. She left a suicide note which read, "Don't let Y come to my funeral. She is mentally ill." Ashley Judd, speaking after her mother's death, pointed out that it occurred one day before she and Winona were to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Quote, "That is the level of catastrophe of what was going on inside of her. Because the barrier between the regard in which they held her couldn't penetrate into her heart, and the lie the disease told her that she was worthless was so convincing she believed it." The autopsy report indicated that Naomi suffered from bipolar disorder, drug and treatment-resistant depression, and anxiety. A postmortem toxicology test conducted on blood taken from her revealed traces of prescription medications, whole variety of them, used to treat major depression, bipolar disorder, and post-traumatic stress syndrome. The psychiatrist had determined during this final 3 or 4 years of working with her before she took her life that she really was a victim of post-traumatic stress because of the childhood and the events in her adulthood involving her family. Naomi Judd said herself in 2016, that important interview that she gave on Good Morning America with Robin Roberts, she said, quote, "When people meet me, they think because they see me in rhinestones, with glitter in my hair, that really is who I am," Naomi Judd said, speaking of her fans. I'm sort of a fantasy because I want to provide that for them. But then I would come home and not leave the house for 3 weeks and not get out of my pajamas and not practice normal hygiene. It was really bad. This is a picture of her toward the end of her life, wig and all, and you can see the cheeks are puffed. This is the effect of the medications that she was taking. Her daughters, Winona and Ashley, issued a joint statement announcing her death. And they said, quote, "Today we sisters experienced a tragedy. We lost our beautiful mother to the disease of mental illness. We are shattered. We are navigating profound grief and know that as we loved her, she was loved by her public. We are in unknown territory." There were a number of celebrities, as you can imagine, who also were close friends, who had many things to say to the press when they heard of her death. Dolly Parton was a particularly good friend of Naomi's, and she said, quote, "I was so shocked to hear about Naomi's passing. Naomi and I were close. We were very similar. We were the same age and both Capricorns. We loved big hair, makeup, and music. I have always loved Ashley, Winona, and Naomi. They've always been like sisters to me." Reba McEntire was another very close friend of Naomi's, and she said, "We've been down the long road together. I sure miss my buddy. Rest in peace, finally. Love you, Naomi." Naomi Ellen Judd Strickland, 1946 to 2022, as she would want to be remembered. She was one of the greatest and honestly probably one of the most underrated performers of her time in the history of music because of her ability to write the music as well as perform the music. The whole point of this program was to let her tell in her own words the story of her life. And she did it, but she did it in 2 different books, and only by reading both of them can you get the full picture. What she wanted to do more than anything else was to help other people suffering with mental illness. I'd like to read a small little section, the end of her book, River of Time. The end of the book, she writes, "Depression can feel like riding a runaway train, heart pounding, full speed ahead, with sudden stops, unpredictable curves, frustrating breakdowns, and never knowing what awaits you around the bend. After the worst 3 years of my complicated life, I've finally gotten off that train. I've landed on my feet after much hard-won soul searching, figuring out my troubled past to understand how and why I boarded that horrible train of depression in the first place. My everyday life is not only manageable, it's even enjoyable once more. I laugh a lot. I'm content and at peace because I practice radical acceptance every single day. Please join me in telling the truth about depression and anxiety to anyone who will listen. It's a disease of the brain, part heredity, part environment. Like heart disease, it is not a character flaw. Only by telling our stories will more people understand. Only by telling the truth will we stop the stigma. I've told my story, so now you know. You can tell yours too. You're not alone. I'm still here." 6 years later, she takes her life. Thank you for listening to her story, and I hope you'll read her books.
Heal my mind. Flow